This is episode 51 of Ethics and Culture Cast from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Welcome to episode 51 of Ethics and Culture Cast from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. I'm Ken Hellenius, the communications specialist at the center. In this episode, we chat with Bill Schmitt, the editor of Telling Stories That Matter, a volume of collected memoirs and essays by Father Marvin O'Connell. We chat about Father O'Connell's long tenure in the Department of History, how he was tapped to write the biography of Father Edward Sorin, and how his pastoral ministry as a priest related to his scholarly work in the classroom. Let's sit down with Bill for this delightful conversation. Well, Bill, thank you so much for sitting down with us and chatting about this book. Tell us a little bit about Father Marvin O'Connell. Where was he from? How did he get to Notre Dame?
Well, he was a son of the Minnesota area with, I guess, growing up mostly in the St. Paul area, but had traveled a bit with his family early on. In any event, when the time came, he went to preparatory seminary in St. Paul, and there started many years of preparation for the priesthood and showing his scholarly clout early on. He was granted a scholarship to get a PhD at Notre Dame in something like the 1950s. He was born in 1930, by the way.
Okay.
His life spans 1930 to 2016. But so he was at Notre Dame getting his PhD, studying under Philip Hughes, who was actually the author of one of the books that really informed his early love of history, a history of the church, while he was in seminary. And then he got his PhD and returned to the what is now the Archdiocese of Minneapolis-St. Paul, and taught at the College of St. Thomas, now the University of St. Thomas, for at least a decade or so. And then in 1972 was invited back to teach at Notre Dame, and in fact for a number of years was chair of the history department, and then he continued to teach and write an enormous amount of material, a total of 10 books if you count this new one, Telling Stories That Matter. And he wrote lots of essays for journals, etc. And then after retiring from full-time teaching, he kind of became the biographer of Edward Sorin, the founder of Notre Dame, and certainly one of the key players in the Holy Cross congregation, and then also began his memoirs, kind of reluctantly, because he was so diligent a historian that he knew that relying on personal memories was a dubious activity. He wanted to make sure that he was extremely factual and unbiased. That was one of the many things that contributed to the fact that he's really thought of now as perhaps the premier or one of the premier Catholic historians of his time.
Wonderful. Well, now, as you mentioned, perhaps most people know of Father O'Connell through his massive 800-page biography
yes, of Sorin,
Notre Dame's founder, Father Edward Sorin, which was published in 2001. This is after he retired from active teaching.
That's right.
Well, how is it that a non-Holy Cross priest came to write the biography of the man whom many refer to as the second founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross?
Well, the answer can be summed up in 3 words: Father Ted Hesburgh.
Of course.
But that was the result of Father Hesburgh knowing of Father O'Connell's excellent scholarship and teaching and all of that from 72 onward, and especially a book that was published in 1988, a history of John Ireland. Father Hesburgh liked O'Connell's style, truly a really remarkable style that told stories very well, and history just could not be boring under his guidance. Father Hesburgh liked that. That's the amazing thing about the Sorin book and other works of O'Connell, that they are very in-depth and indeed big tomes sometimes. But people say that they read like novels because they're all about people and all about the times, life and times, the places, the eras, and the complex circumstances. As O'Connell himself said, the stories within stories that really make life interesting. And that's one reason why, he talked about telling stories that matter, because they were all about people and their interrelationships and their relationship with God. So Father Hesburgh wanted to capture all of that in a biography of Notre Dame's founder.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because their times, actually, Father O'Connell and Father Hesburgh were very contemporaneous, right? Because they both came to Notre Dame in the 50s.
That's right.
And then were here all the way into the 2000s.
That's right.
Into the 2010s even.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah, and the history department was certainly a gem, I think, during that time, as throughout Notre Dame's times. But there was a real respect there, I believe. The academic caliber of O'Connell's work shone through.
Yeah, I noticed an interesting tidbit as I was kind of looking into background. Father O'Connell is buried in the Holy Cross Cemetery here.
Oh, okay. Campus. I didn't even know that. My gracious. Not surprising, because relationships were not only important to his books, but important to him. And besides Father Ted, I'm sure there were many other priests, including Father Bill Miscampbell, who was a driving force behind this book. There were probably very good relationships with a number of different Holy Cross priests, a lot of mutual admiration.
Sure. Well, let's talk a bit about this book, Telling Stories That Matter, Memoirs and Essays. As you mentioned, historian and professor Father Bill Miscampbell penned the foreword.
Right.
And then the De Nicola Center's founding director, when it was the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, David Solomon, wrote the afterword.
Yes.
But how did you, Bill Schmitt, come to be involved with this project?
Oh, it was really just through my association with those two scholars and many other different projects, some of which brought me in touch with Father Miscampbell, and others which brought me in touch with the Sorin book, because I was writing about historic matters connected to the Congregation of Holy Cross. So I had some verisimilitude there as a familiar, a person familiar with some of the history, but I can't say enough about what a privilege it was to be invited to be the editor, because talk about relationships. Father Miscampbell and David Solomon had relationships, close friendships that I think lasted 30 years in the case of Father Miscampbell, and perhaps more like 60 in the case of David Solomon. So they they had these materials that Father O'Connell had placed in safekeeping with Father Miss Campbell, the memoirs that were never completed. He only made it up to the 70s in his actual memoirs, although we found a good way to take care of that. And so I felt like a real entrustment of valuable resources of memory and relationship were being, that was in my hands to edit. Of course, there was also a good amount of wise guidance to not edit too heavily. So, because that was one thing that legend told us Father O'Connell himself did not like. He did not like to be edited. And so one way of respecting the history we were compiling was to respect that wish even on into today.
Wow. There's another character who is on the cover but was not involved in the book except his memories of Father O'Connell. And that is somebody that I was surprised to learn had been with him even in seminary formation.
Yes.
Of course, the great father as a dad,
right.
Ralph McInerney.
That's right. And indeed, in a sense, an almost father because they did indeed meet in seminary. Ralph McInerney discerned a different vocation. But in a lot of ways, they were natural friends, and probably even surpassing the tenure of friendship that O'Connell had with David Solomon. And also very interesting similarities in terms of loving both fiction and nonfiction. Of course, McInerney was a great philosopher. But he was also known for writing detective novels and things like that. So they admired each other on many levels and knew each other and kind of were in sync with each other. So having a tribute that McInerney wrote some years ago now, but fairly recently, adds a nice additional touch of intimacy to the story that we tell, kind of extending the memoirs that were directly written into decade upon decade further on. And McInerney lived those years with Father O'Connell before McInerney himself passed away.
Right. Are there any particular essays or tidbits from the memoir or his essays that you particularly enjoyed and might recommend to the attentive reader?
Yes. Yeah, we collected, well, actually, Father Miss Campbell collected a wonderful selection that was a good sampling of one of the things that made Father O'Connell such a premier Catholic historian, namely having written about everything from the Reformation and Counter-Reformation to the Oxford movement and John Henry Newman, to modernism, etc., and of course a number of books on other subjects and other people. But I personally, perhaps because of my journalism background, liked a few. One was his journal article about the Spanish Inquisition, and it immediately made me think of the problem with disinformation that exists today, because this very renowned historian had the factual and contextual ammunition to really knock down what was clearly a long history of misinformation or misunderstanding about the Inquisition, where so many people had hyperbolized about it. And so by reading that, not only did I see his strong determination to stick to the facts and to be a kind of guardian of facts against misinformation, but one also learned, and this was the case with the Sorin book and every other book, one learns about the context of the times. And, for instance, just the thought, and I guess I knew this and that we all know this, but it became so clear when he said that that distinction that we take for granted now between the church and state simply was not a thing.
Sure.
Back then. And so to be judging or to be analyzing that situation in such terms, and targeting the church as a particular villain in these matters, that was just historically misinformed. So I loved that one. I think the modernism essay that he wrote, which was certainly referencing a major book that he wrote on that subject. The modernism was a wonderful analysis of an important trend in the church, as he analyzed it, and in society today, as I guess we're all quite aware, that move toward subjective thinking and ultimately a greater tendency toward relativism. And he was seeing that in the church and in the society from very early on, 60s and beyond. And to this very rigorous historian who really did care about getting the not just the facts of a person or event right, but the facts of the whole context right. The idea of dealing mostly subjectively or mostly through the emotions with any kind of historical analysis was verboten, really, because that subjectivity in modernism, while he was very good at seeing both sides of all issues, in that sense, very, very objective. But he came down on, maybe modernism allows for some new personal growth in terms of creativity, et cetera, or new viewpoints. In matters of scholarship, especially, and in matters of just learning lessons from the past, we have to resist that kind of relativism.
Having read through his memoirs and essays, both those included in this book, and I assume you also read some others that maybe didn't make the cut, but what do you make of the influence of his priesthood on his scholarship? I mean, is it important that he was Father Marvin O'Connell? Does that have an effect?
Great question. Yes. And, even such little signals as, not including the rubric of father in his book covers, et cetera, as an author, at first suggested to me that maybe, historian overrode, at least in these instances that I was reading, overrode the priesthood factor. But very, very much not so. I came to see that being a priest was essential to his love of people's stories. He loved to, he spent a fair amount of time at working in parishes, especially in service to the St. Paul area. And also, he really came to see that you couldn't tell the story of people or events without capturing their good and their bad, their sinfulness and their saintliness. He loved to see both sides, to exercise judgment, but also compassion. And I saw that, and I think his friends saw that was a very priestly and pastoral instinct that actually added to the objectivity, balance, and compelling nature of the histories that he wrote. And he called the historian's craft being a midwife to faith, because he really knew in his heart that Christianity and Catholicism is a historical religion based on the fact of Jesus Christ living on this earth and living and present in the sacramental life and in people's lives throughout time. This was a very concrete thing to him that he had experienced and that had to be told. And that, again, was something that made these stories that matter to him.
Incarnational.
Exactly. The incarnational imagination, Catholic imagination, was very much alive in his books and articles and in his memoirs.
Wow. Yeah. I know from reading the memoirs, just kind of dipping in, it's a gripping story, and he tells it very vividly.
Yes, he does. Yes. That's why people said that his style was novel-like. Mm-hmm. And indeed, in one of the essays that we have in there, he talks about how his love of history was born reading, as a child, historical fiction, not historical nonfiction.
Sure.
And he was an only child who kind of was, his family was traveling early on and all. And he spent a lot of time in the library and gravitated toward books, including George Washington's World. And very interesting that one of the things he loved about that book was that it talked about not only the valor and the mystique of the founding father, but also George Washington's relationships with people around the world and other countries' relationships with the early United States. So he really captured that in all of his books later on, and loved other novelists and other playwrights, and of course Ralph McInerney
right.
encouraged his longtime friend to be a writer of fiction as well as nonfiction.
Well, what are some overall lessons, or we might say stories that matter, that the reader might take from reading this book?
Well, I think that there is a great insight into church history that can be gotten partly from the memoirs that he wrote directly, and certainly in the essays, both the broad sweep of church history, because indeed he was writing about centuries worth of church history, but also the way that one can get a feel for what it was like to be a priest in a very much changing Catholic Church during the times that bracketed Vatican II, mm-hmm. From the 50s right onward. And he went through it all, and it talks about frustrations. He's very candid about how he was pained by seeing so many priests, including many that he had known in seminary, etc., leaving the church after Vatican II. So there's a lot of poignant candor there that tells you about the church. And for me, while Father O'Connell can best be thought of as a stalwart guardian against the incorporation of the present into the past, or the incorporation of our lens of today looking at the past, I do think that reading about his days can inform us with some concrete lessons, factual lessons, not subjective lessons about the church, about human life, and how to value history, because so often today we simplify history and maybe just pick up one aspect of a person's life, label that aspect, label that person, and maybe do away with the statue of that person as a result. Mm-hmm. But there are so many ways in which we can learn to value people as whole lives, in which the Lord is acting, and none of that, and none of the context through which the Lord acts, the times that the person lived in, the place, the circumstances that person faced. None of that can be safely ignored. And that's in our short attention span society today. We need to remember that we're not really culling the best lessons of history if we're forgetting that, ignoring that, oversimplifying that.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Bill Schmitt, thank you so much for helping bring this important book to fruition.
Oh, well, it was my pleasure, and I do hope that many aspiring historians, students, because he was a teacher at heart too, and loved bringing up students in historiography, etc. It would be an honor to him for historians, young and old, to be informed by and inspired by him once again, and to also a wider audience, because a lot of people who aren't historians are interested certainly in church history and in the history of those that half century during which he lived. And we have a lot to learn from him. I had a lot to learn from him. And I'm coming away inspired, so I do hope that many other people, I'm sure a lot of people will be coming away from the book inspired.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Bill Schmitt. You'll find a link to the book Telling Stories That Matter, as well as other projects of Bill's, in the show notes. Subscribe to Ethics and Culture Cast so that you can always get the latest episodes by visiting ethicscenter.nd.edu/podcast. We would love your feedback. Please review the show on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, and email your suggestions to cecpodcast@nd.edu. Our theme music is I Don't Know by Grapes, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution License. We'll see you next time on Ethics and Culture Cast. Until then, make good decisions.